Hey there, this is Sahila. My camera's up there, the screen's here, and my data board and instructions and tools and that are all there. So it's a funny way to set this up. But it's been a long time since I talked to anybody, uploaded, recorded anything. It used to be Wednesdays with Sahilas, and then it was Thursdays with Sahila, and then it was Mondays with Sahila, and then it was Sundays with Sahila. Today just happens to be Tuesday, so it's Tuesday with Sahila, and I'm attempting to do a very small, short recording before I need to head off to the hospital and have my last radiation session. So also the glasses are not great, but can't see without them these days. You'd be a blur. So what I really wanted to talk to you about was first to say thank you to all the people who've been sending messages of support as I've had to get back on the chemo and the radiation wheel. And secondly, I have been thinking long and hard about this initiative, the 51%, where mad as hell and we're not taking it anymore, and the Women's Global Party, or the Global Women's Party, that I've had an idea about for a long time, and I have floated the idea on the 51% Facebook page and created a separate Global Women's Party Facebook page, which is not doing anything at the moment. Quite a few women have said that they're really, really interested in the idea. The original concept was to get women 51% of the power through, and the idea was to set up a Global Women's Party and to work globally and in each country to make sure that women get 50%, at least 50% of positions in governance, because we can't actually make a difference in the world if we don't get access to creating legislation and into having the power to vote for or against legislation as it's being made. That seems to me where the primary seat of power is, seeing society runs on legislation. The rich can do what they like, they can ignore the legislation and live their own lives, but the rest of us are bound by it. And it seems that the rich and the powerful and the corporations, the oligarchs behind the scenes, are the ones controlling what's going into legislation, and so the only way to make any of that change is to have women have at least half the species, have at least half the power in that. So that was the original idea around the 51% and the Global Women's Party. And I've been really stop start and getting this off the ground because my health issues keep getting in the way. Every time I get a burst of energy on it, then the cancer comes back, and then I'm back on the chemo wheel, and time goes by while I do treatment and I get my life back on track and I get some energy, and then it's time to focus on that again. So I've been finding that very frustrating, and I've also felt that I've been in a position of being in dereliction of my duty, and the fact that none of this, the ideas and the baby groups, organizations, or the baby group isn't in a position where it's people have stepped forward, or I've asked specifically, and people have stepped forward to take leadership initiatives on this and to run with it, even though I might be MIA because of health issues. So and the Global Women's Party and the 51% are based on the idea that women of all beliefs and ideologies and political leanings can, if they wish, and they've been successful at this in the past, and they're successful at this right now in a couple of initiatives, that women can work together on specific issues. They can put their differences aside and work together in the places where they do agree on things. And I thought that the 51% and the Global Women's Party would work on, there's a new word that a couple of other women have been floating since the end of the year, and that's femalism. And I think that that's a really good way to get around the problem, and it is a problem, when some women feel they can only work with other feminists, and some women feel like, just a moment, I've got a reminder to restart my computer and I'm going to tell it to postpone. So some women feel like they can only work with other feminists and they can only work with radical feminists, and some women feel like they can't work with feminists at all because feminist ideology, teachings, as far as they're aware of, go several steps too far. So they can't give it their full-hearted support. But there is an area in between where, like in a Venn diagram, where we share interests in common regardless of our political leanings and our ideological leanings. And I want us to use that space to make a difference, because from my perspective, we've been trying to do this stuff for a long, long time, and our differences have divided us and have stopped us from being as effective as we could be, and have, they've stymied any attempts to reach across the aisle and to build alliances and coalitions. And I've used the term ideological purity in the past, and I've been dismissive of that term. And my view on that hasn't changed. I think that on certain issues, I think that we could create an organisation, a global and a local organisation, local to every country and every state. We could create a global organisation where women are working together for a particular goal, and then as an organisation, as a collective, as a global women's party. And then if they have other things that they need to work on that don't fall within the broad purview of what a global women's party is trying to do, then they could go, break back out into their own groups and do their own work in those areas. But there are massive, massive things that we could be doing as a unified global party of female humans. So, which is why I like the word femalism, because it attempts to get around the roadblocks that happen and keep us separate in places where there is no need to be separate. So over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been seeing more and more little statements on various Facebook pages and different groups saying, why can't we need a global women's party, or we need a global women's organisation, or we need to get together internationally. The wins that women in the UK have shown that it is possible to make change happen, to stand fast and start to turn the tide on the trans juggernaut, for example. And women in the US are starting to get together on that, and women in Australia, and women in New Zealand, and women in Canada. And I think that what needs to happen is for us to create a global organisation, and it can be in name only. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't even have to be official. We can work towards being official, but we just create an entity. We just call ourselves the Global Women's Party, and voila, that's what we are. I told a story on the 51% page about how I and 3 or 4 other women created the Seattle Shadow School Board in exactly this way. We were being sarcastic about how, in terms of neoliberal education reform, Seattle was filled with all of these AstroTurf lobby groups. And we call, I can't remember what, sorry, I've got chemo brain going on. We called them the acronym societies, and it was like TFA, which was short for Teach for America, and A for E, which was the Alliance for Education, and there were like half a dozen of other ones. and they were all turf groups pretending to be grassroots organisations, but funded by billionaire organisations. Where have we heard that story before, in terms of the trans thing? So, I was in a meeting on a Sunday afternoon talking about math curriculum and how children with disabilities were being screwed by the school district and under education reform, and we were being sarcastic and joking about all of these acronyms, and we came up with the idea that we could be the S3B, the Seattle Shadow School Board, S cubed B, and that we were joking and being fatuous about the fact that we were doing the work of the school board, because we were we were doing what everybody who's fighting against the trans thing does. We cross-check all the information that's presented. We go back to the sources of claims. We go read the research. We double-check the public relations bullshit that's being put out, and we held the newspapers accountable for what they were reporting. And so, we were doing the work of the school board. So we called ourselves the Seattle Shadow School Board, put out a bunch of press releases, and the next thing you know, we had a legitimate presence in the city in terms of we did a bunch of amazing activities. We found that some of us had access to the entire email list of the Seattle School District staff, and so we created a form letter that we sent out to all teachers, suggesting that there was talk of mounting a campaign, a no confidence campaign in the Seattle School District superintendent. And so we, as parents in the Seattle Shadow School Board, sent out an email to every single teacher in the district, suggesting that they join us in this vote of no confidence, and several schools did. We got lots of media attention, and every time there was an issue, the media would come to me and another couple of women in this group that didn't exist on paper. It only existed because we said it existed. We had no legal standing. We had no money to create an official organisation, like to register it as a lobby group or as any kind of group of a political party or anything. And we weren't interested in codifying it in quite that way. A couple of women thought that we might do that later on, but there was no need to go to that extent to have an impact and to have a presence. So I'm suggesting that we could do something similar for the Global Women's Party. We could just create it. It exists because we say it exists. We identify as the Global Women's Party. So we could set this up as an international grouping, and it could be the Global Women's Party UK, the Global Women's Party USA, the Global Women's Party Canada, the Global Women's Party France, the Global Women's Party Spain, the Global Women's Party South Korea, the Global Women's Party South Africa, the Global Women's Party Aotearoa New Zealand, whatever. So we could have an overarching umbrella, and we could have branches under the umbrella. So I've seen lots and lots of women asking for something like this right now, and I think that now is the time, and I think we could have a massive impact if we get it together. And it's not all that difficult. It just, like the women who, whenever I think about this, I think about the women who got together and created the Women's Declaration or the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. That started off in a similar vein. A group of women got together, started talking about a need for a declaration, a universal declaration of women's sex-based rights. And people got together and worked together, across countries, meeting however they needed to meet, however they could meet. They came up with a declaration, and then they turned themselves into an official organisation. And now they're getting some recognition in places of power at the United Nations and in the EU, and starting to get some traction in the UK and in the US. So I don't see why we can't do this with something like a global women's party. So that's what I'm hoping to be the, I'm hoping that my claim to fame, for want of a better word, is that I've had these ideas for a long time, and that the time for them to come into to fruition and into being and to making an impact is now. The time is right now, and that we can use an organization like this to take back and to establish women's presence and women's rights across the globe, women's presence in governance, and to secure the continuation of women's sex-based rights. And as a side issue to that, working to stop the castration, sterilisation and mutilation of children who cannot give informed consent, children who don't conform to sex role stereotypes. There are other issues. Some of us might be interested about what's happening in terms of global climate disruption, but that's not necessarily something that it should be at the forefront, but we keep getting waylaid by ridiculous stuff like the transgender ideology being embedded in the legal structures of most countries. And I did try to think of what was the first priority. Was the first priority to get more women in Parliament or in Congress or in the Senate or in whatever your ruling bodies are called, from the very highest levels of governance in society down to even, school boards and the boards of corporations and things? Was that the first priority? And for a long time that was my first priority. But then I saw the danger that is happening to women as a sex class being erased in legislation by this legal fiction that we've got in place now that says that males too can be women if they say they are, or if they get a piece of paper that says they are. And this erasure of women as a sex class, and then the erasure of our sex-based rights, that to me seems to be a more pressing issue, because when you erase women as a sex class, then you can't really push for women to have parity in governance, or equality and equity in representation in governance, because now we have it that males can claim to be women, they can get elected to government, and the government can turn around and say, oh, well, you women have got your representation because X, Y, and Z is a woman, when in fact he's a male and he's not. So that's my reasoning for thinking that we should all come together and form a global women's party, and that this business about the trans ideology infiltrating all levels of society and erasing women as a sex class for legislative and policy purposes, and erasing women's sex-based rights. And the immediate danger in the US is the passing of the Equality Act. And I have some thoughts about whether or not the current drafts on the table should be tweaked, or whether or not we should push for everything to be scrapped and to start again. My personal preference is to scrap everything and start again, because I think that tweaking something doesn't generally work out really well, because you can't remove, for example, I don't think that trans ideology should be embedded in law. I don't believe that we should be have the words gender identity or gender reassignment or those kinds of words in legislation that's talking about how we classify and categorize human beings. Gender should not, a subjective personality, self-image should not be legislated into law. Based on nothing more than whatever the person says about themselves. I think it's really dangerous to go and change ID documents for a few people amongst us, that, the changes in ID documents are acts of perjury and lying, and they are fraudulent they become fraudulent documents when this person who is a human male gets to change his birth certificate marker to female and to claim to be a woman. I don't believe that we have it's a sensible thing to be able to enable people to commit perjury on official ID documents. It's a very slippery slope, and the rest of us can't get away with any of that. We can't change we can change our names, but we can't change our sex markers, and we can't. What happens when you change the sex markers and the name in these cases is that a person's history basically disappears, and the rest of us don't get to know about who this person was before they changed their sex markers. It all gets locked away behind the doors called the past. Dead naming, for example, being a criminalised offence, or that's what the plan is. So that's about where I'm at, and I'd love to talk to other women who are interested in doing this. You can message me on my Facebook page, or find me at the 51%, we're as mad as hell, we're not taking it any longer or anymore page, or the Global Women's Party page, although I've noticed that somebody else is trying to set up a page with a similar name. And that the reason we can't just have the Women's Party is because some male wearing woman face in Australia nabbed that name and has set up a party in Australia. I was spitting tacks when I found that out. I thought, oh well, what did I expect? But anyway, so that's the reason why we just can't call ourselves the Women's Party. It has to be something like the Global Women's Party. Alright, I've been going on for 21 minutes, and I'm going to call it quits here and upload this to Facebook, and possibly to I'm going to I've got an old YouTube channel that I set up a long time ago but haven't used. I was going to upload a whole bunch of really old videos to that, but they're all very long and we have a very slow internet connection. It takes forever, so I don't think I'll bother. I'll just start from scratch. So I will upload these to my Facebook account and to the 51% and the Global Women's account and to my siblings' account, and we'll take it from there. And if anyone who already has a YouTube channel wants to interview me about this, I'm really open to that. For me personally, with this cancer stuff, it's like if I'm going to do this, I need to do this now, because I don't know how long I'm going to be on the planet, and I just want to make sure that I've done all the work that I can do to make something happen. This is my share of the pushback, and I have the skills and talents to do this. What I want is for a bunch of women to get together and to make this happen, with me being a part of that, not necessarily being the owner or the leader of that, because with my health situation there's going to be times when I don't have the energy or the focus to do any of the work. So if this is going to work, it has to be an organisation that is collaborative and where women are working together and sharing the load and sharing the leadership. Would much prefer that this wasn't a hierarchical situation, and that it relies on me to do the making it happen part by myself. I want women to step up and step into their own leadership capacity and capabilities, and to work together to make it happen. All right, that's it for now. Take care. Blessings.